And so I also start introducing the seminar, maybe. So thank you very much to Peter Ulrich for joining us today, and thank you to Nina Amelung to proposing us to co-organize this seminar. So this session today is a kind of a joint event of two groups and two initiatives. Sorry, just let me open in my notes. So we have the initiative, the groups, the research group live at the Institute of Social Science at the University of Lisbon, that is co-chaired by Nina, who is organizing this seminar today with me. And with Rafael, LIFE stands for Life Course in Equality and Solidarity, Practices and Policies. And the central goal of this research group is to get to know how all the new forms of inequality and solidarity are reproduced in a global society. And the group is coordinated together by Sofia Boim and Nina Amelung, as I was saying. And the other partner of the event of this initiative is our monthly seminar, Social Movements and Political Action. The seminar has been existing for 11 years now. It was created in 2014 by Britta Baumgarten, who unfortunately she left some years ago. And myself, and it is a monthly seminar, so we have collected more than 100 sessions, something like 110. We celebrated 10 years in the past October, exact 1 year ago. And the goal of the seminar is to discuss with any topic related to social movements, political action, and any form of political participation and action that doesn't pass exactly to institutions or formal channels of participation, and also to cover different areas of the world that usually are not really under the lenses of social movements research, like also Sub-Saharan Africa and other countries in the global south, and also to discuss topics that are not always central in the research on social movements, and perspective also that are not always the most usual, coming from different disciplinary areas, including, apart from sociology, anthropology, political science, also urban studies, architecture, social psychology, and many different other areas. So, but now it's time for me to leave the floor to Nina, that she will introduce our today guest. And thank you very much, Peter, for joining us and to give this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Guia, for introducing the seminar. A warm welcome from my side, and it's a great pleasure to do this collaboratively together with Guia and also Rafael, and also from the two institutional backgrounds we bring together. And it's in particular a great pleasure to have Peter Ulrich with us. And now I also enjoy the pleasure to introduce Peter to you. So Peter Ulrich, who has this doctor combination, which is a German thing to differentiate between also medical doctor and the philosophy doctor that Peter obtained. But in this context, it's important to say that he is a sociologist and cultural scientist at the Universität Berlin, Technical University of Berlin. And he is a senior researcher there at the Center for Technology and Society and fellow at the Center for Research on Anti-Semitism. And his fields of research are anti-Semitism and debates about anti-Semitism, as well as social movements and protest policing. And I would like just to expand a little bit on that. So on the one hand, Peter has this long-standing career on social movements and policing of social movements. And I just would like to select two research contributions in this area. So one is that he was principal investigator of a research project entitled Video Surveillance and Demonstrations, Praxis and Knowledge Forms of Police and Protesters, which was funded by the German Science Foundation. And the other one, and that is important also in the context of this seminar, is that he co-authored a book chapter with Britta Baumgarten, who was just mentioned by Guya, who is the co-founder of the Social Movement Seminar. And that was published in 2016, entitled Discourse, Power and Governmentality, Social Movement Research with and Beyond Foucault. And that was published in an edited volume with the title Social Theory and Social Movements. On the other hand, Peter is an expert on anti-Semitism and the struggle around the term in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And he has numerous publications on these matters, such as the recent publication, which is published in German, but literally translated to What is Anti-Semitism? Concepts and Definitions of Jew Hatred. That was published last year. He also has extensively given and continues to give public talks on these matters. And he also published a short text that I will share in the chat in a moment, which is in English, entitled Anti-Antisemitism is Fueling an Authoritarian Climate in Germany. I also want just to mention a very brief note about my personal connection to Peter. I do know Peter now for about 15 years, as we had a short-term time working together at the Center for Technology and Society at the Technical University of Berlin. But most important to me was now, in the context of the seminar, I heard one of his talks he gave last year at Humboldt University in Berlin, and it became clear to me that I would like to invite him for a talk for at least 3 reasons. One is that he is one of the few academics who keeps on researching and speaking extremely knowledgeable and with a rare analytical sharpness about the scope and depth of what he calls misguided anti-Antisemitism in Germany. The second reason for me is that he does so in and about public, political, and academic spaces in Germany, which have turned into spaces that are increasingly being governed by quasi-law, monitored by law enforcement agencies, and turn the space and consider what is debatable in public as a problem of social order rather than a political problem. And so he does that in a context in Germany that has widely silenced critical and differentiated voices and has basically also destroyed safe spaces for critical analysis and debate. The third one is that although Peter's work focuses on Germany, I strongly believe that the transnational dialogue or international dialogue and exchange of experiences across countries, so today, maybe also in particular, the exchange across the German and Portuguese experience, are also important to stimulate solidarity across academia and movements. And as Peter has also stated his curiosity when we previously talked about this seminar today about the situation in Portugal, I also already would like to invite the audience to share their reflections later on in the discussion. So we are happy to have you here, Peter, for a talk and a discussion on the day that marks the 2 years after the Hamas attack, the day that we also keep on watching the genocide against the Palestinian people being live streamed in front of our eyes, but also on a day that we witness a momentum of global uprising of solidarity movements. So a lot of context to also possibly bring back in our discussion. So we are extremely happy to have you with us, and the floor is yours to talk to us about authoritarian anti-Semitism. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation and the introduction, which really is an introduction. I hope my presentation itself is half as complex and extensive. Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm really happy to be here. Also remembering our dear colleague Britta Baumgarten, which I once visited in Lisbon when we collaborated on the book on social movements and culture, which was just mentioned by Nina. And it's also very sad to have her not among us anymore. And it's also a pity for me not to be directly with you, facing you. But let's make the best of it. Just one correction. I'm not a medical doctor. I have 2 doctorates, but it was in medical sociology. I'm basically a sociologist.
Apologies for the
Two
confusion.
PhDs, no problem at all. But I didn't want to have you false expectations concerning problems I can't help you with. Yeah, my talk is about what I call authoritarian anti-Antisemitism. It is predominantly, as Nina mentioned, about Germany and its many peculiarities and specificities, although some trends, of course, might sound not so unfamiliar regarding developments in the US and Britain and elsewhere. Rather than presenting an empirical research project, I will make some claims or formulate some propositions about how to conceptually grasp the authoritarian tendencies we face under the guise of anti-Antisemitism. The heading of my introduction, by the way, I have called "Have Some People Got Stuck in the Calendar?" Why is that? Let me explain. Very much has been written about the events of October the 7th, 2023. Including about what they brought to light, such as the broad lack of empathy for the victims of the Hamas attack on part of certain sections of the campus left. This current interpreted the reactionary, anti-Israeli and misogynist outburst of extreme violence, for example, as a military operation, or the Palestinian resistance, for example, class against class in Germany, amongst others. In short, the massacre for them was a day to be proud of. This is Palestine Speaks from Germany. A full-fledged ideological anti-Zionist worldview with some anti-Semitic leanings and in some cases explicitly anti-Semitic expressions is rearing its ugly head and is on the rise in some parts of the pro-Palestinian and anti-war protests around the world. This is a worldview that considers Zionism, along with capitalism, imperialism, racism, war, one of the world's fundamental evils. This should not be confused with a critique of Zionism, even a radical one. We might talk about this later. But my first claim, we are now quite obviously, and Nina mentioned this, quite obviously and for quite some time in a completely different situation. A different problem has come to the fore in the ongoing genocidal Israeli war. But some people cling to this situation of October 2023, which I initially described, that they cling to this framing that comes along with it with all their might. Because this friend-enemy binary is not only to be found among the campus troops of Israel's opponents. On the contrary, the second-order Palestinian conflict, or as Kenneth Stern puts it, the conflict over the conflict, quickly reached a new level after October the 7th in a debate about anti-Semitism. In a downright moral panic, as Donatella Della Porta and others analyzed it, there was soon a tendency that somehow mirrors the situation I described initially, a tendency to suspect anti-Semitism behind every expression of pro-Palestinian or Palestinian perspectives and demands, and of compassion with Palestinian victims of Israel's war in Gaza, a war which quickly ceased to be a legitimate response and turned into a tremendous war crime. And ultimately, there was a tendency to impute an anti-Semitic motivation to every form of activism against what's going on in Gaza. Palestinians and their supporters became the receivers of all kinds of smear, suspicion, and manifest repression, making them the folk devils of the moral panic, though, in the words of this theory, the dangerous subject that seemingly threatened the very social and moral order. The stage of the possibility of interpreting virtually everything Palestinian or pro-Palestinian as dangerous has been set by Hamas sympathizers distributing sweets in the Berlin borough of Neukölln on the day after the massacre. But they served then as a pattern for the interpretation of all kinds of activities by Palestinians and Palestine solidarity. This established a form of anti-Palestinian racism that is not necessarily intentional, but nevertheless effective racism regarding its outcomes. It was most obvious in, for example, general decrees issued by the police in some cities that banned all Palestine-related gatherings, due to what they called typical emotionalism of the participants. It is worth noting in this context that the occasion of most of these protests is a genocidal war that has left tens of or hundreds of thousands dead, and that many of these protests were largely carried out by people with close personal and family ties to Gaza. This constellation, I quickly tried to outline, is of course not completely new. Such identitarian proclamations, the obligation to profess loyalty and absolute partisanship, something I called radical identification, these tendencies have long characterized the discursive field Israel, Palestine, Jews, anti-Semitism, etc. in Germany. At the same time, this discourse has also always been characterized by a reductionism that, following a binary kind of trench war logic, does not distinguish between the various dimensions of the conflict, just mentioning cultural, economic, political, moral, and other dimensions. So one side sees it as a mere asymmetrical conflict of interests. The other side interprets it through the lens of anti-Semitism. So the first reductionism refuses to address anti-Semitism, especially within their own ranks, by pointing to the facts on the ground. And the second reductionism, indeed also the most astonishing in its theoretical idealism and sociological narrow-mindedness, the second reductionism considers the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to be essentially about anti-Semitism, assuming that this conflict would not even exist if there was not one side so anti-Semitic, like it was articulated, for example, by two German professors of sociology and political science last year in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. This idea, this reductionism, is, albeit in an exaggerated form, the ideological foundation for instrumentalizing the critique of anti-Semitism as a mere accusation of anti-Semitism. This is the cognitive core of what I call authoritarian anti-Antisemitism. This perspective can be used to delegitimize any not entirely tame criticism of Israel, of Zionism, of the decades-long occupation, of settler violence, or of the current genocidal war. The debate then in Germany is more concerned about the appropriateness of the terms used to describe what's going on, like apartheid, genocide, etc., than about the actual situation itself. As scholars such as my colleagues Hannah Zuberi and Patricia Pieberger have repeatedly pointed out, the German media and in the German media and in the German established political discourse, criticism of Israel's human rights record and of Israel's action is not measured in terms of its factual accuracy or of its political aptness, but, as it were, is first made to pass the anti-Semitism test before it can be considered at all. This is also evident in the obvious legal nihilism widespread amongst German politicians and as regards statements critical of Israel by international judicial proceedings and United Nations resolutions. In this very German perspective, Israel does not appear as an actual, real nation state that is an object in the real world, but it plays out in the what Zuberi and Pieberger called imagined space of the past. And in the German project of becoming good again, this is a German word, Wiedergutmachung and Wiedergutwerdung quasi, a German discourse on be amongst the good again, to become good again, things like this. So a struggle that is now usually designated as the struggle against anti-Semitism and for the protection of Jewish life, which a formulation you can find in all the respective documents. I said This is not all this is very new. What is new about the current constellation, and this is my second claim for this talk, is the scope and depth of how this misguided anti-Antisemitism and or the degree to which it has become bureaucratized, or the degree to which the debate over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been the object of juridification and securitization. That means, Nina already mentioned it, that the space of what is considered to be debatable in public is increasingly being governed by quasi-law, monitored by law enforcement agencies, and it is treated as a problem of social order rather than a political problem. This is the central aspect of authoritarian anti-Semitism, transforming a political, ethical, moral, etc. problem in a problem of social order maintenance, thereby legitimizing an undeclared state of exception. Only obliquely, this is about fighting actual anti-Semitism, and it involves other aims as well. I will come to that. Above all, and this is my major claim, it is a trend that is attaching to other illiberal tendencies, embedding itself in and reinforcing an authoritarian turn, even if not always intentionally. This is why I call this constellation authoritarian anti-Semitism. The authoritarian anti-Semitism draws on at least two distinct sources. One is a political position that combines a real, genuine concern for Jewish people and a high awareness of anti-Semitism with very problematic universalizations of the lessons of history. This position sees itself as articulating an anti-fascist lesson from the Holocaust, but consistently locates the fascism of the present in pro-Palestinian discourse. I do not have enough time to expand on that, so I'll only give you a typical example of what this means. Sigmund Königsberg, the anti-Semitism commissioner of the Jewish congregation in Berlin, for example, wrote about the BDS protest, a protest of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement in Berlin, on his Facebook page, that BDS today is nothing different than the SA in 1933, referring to the Nazi stormtroopers. So, and you can find endless amounts of headlines, newspaper reports, etc., on the BDS movement in the German discourse that follow this style. But still, as I said, by people of whom I believe that they also have a genuine concern regarding anti-Semitism. Ultimately, this position, metaphorically speaking, one might say it's at best only able to make out differences of degree between the Nazi boycott of Jewish businesses and the boycott of Israel as an occupying power that's accused of a genocide with quite some legitimacy. It's a position that you can find in the so-called anti-German left or critique of ideology, as they sometimes call themselves, in left-wing solidarity circles with Israel, as well as in socially liberal civil society. I said there are two distinct sources. The second source of this discourse is a genuinely right-wing discourse that the AfD, the very successful right-wing party in Germany, has been propagating for years, and which overlaps with the discourse of a significant portion of the liberal and conservative mainstream. In this discourse, you have an instrumentalization of what they call Christian Jewish legacy or Christian Jewish Occident, combined with anti-Muslim and anti-leftist resentment, which they disguise as anti-extremist, and which forms a national interest position that extends back to, I already mentioned that, to the efforts to make amends during the Adenauer era. Just want to remember, those of you who know, or to point out that I mean, the German called the money that was given to Israel in its early years Wiedergutmachungszahlung, so payments to make amends, with the hope that everything should be good again. And at the end of the 50s, the then Chancellor Adenauer started questioning, isn't now everything good again? So you just have to know this as the background for development of the official state positions towards Israel that left its traces in the civil society too. This whole discourse, this is important to mention, is instrumental in the national exoneration from the Holocaust. But the one-sidedness and the one-sided partisanship of both of these currents or ideological strands, so the more liberal and the more right-wing one, the one-sidedness in favor of Israel and of its policies seemingly remains also unshaken by even the most openly fascist attitudes and practices of the current Israeli government. The fact that both these trends, the liberal one and the conservative one, that both these currents agree on the identification of their opponents as Muslims, woke, post-colonial, pro-Palestinians, conceals the disagreements between those two camps and allows for a strategic alliance. So that also means that the liberal or progressive or seemingly progressive part in this discourse is contributing to authoritarianism without actually wanting this, I might say. It's really, I would say, important to remember this here, that the liberals, through this this deviation on anti-Semitism can become drivers of an authoritarian turn or even fascistization of society today. Of course, in the last couple of months, we've seen some fissures in this discourse related to the worldwide shift of opinion against Israel. However, I remain skeptical if this will have a real impact with the potential to change the whole structure. And now a bit more systematic. I forgot to start my presentation, which I will do now. The heading, as you realized.
Yeah, we can see it well.
So, now a bit of what is authoritarian anti-Semitism, a bit more abstract. The trend towards authoritarian anti-Semitism found its most obvious or downright exemplary expressions in the events surrounding the Gaza war protest camp at Freie Universität in Berlin in spring 2024. This protest camp was cleared by the police using massive force and which was ordered by the steering committee of the university for no apparent reason, without any serious incidents or criminal incidents having occurred. One of the most brutal police operations in recent decades, according to the experienced political scientist Hajo Funke at Freie Universität. Hundreds of academics criticized this in an open letter. They did not express their solidarity with the content of the camp, but only appealed to the right to protest and to be safe from police violence, calling for universities to find a different way to deal with such incidents and generally to deal with the conflict. And an act of excessively heightened ambiguity intolerance, especially the Springer press, so this is the conservative right-wing pro-Israel press by Axel Springer Company, pilloried the signatories as supporters of Jew-hating demonstrations. Or you can see here supporters of Israel hate and Jew and the student mob. And they called the signatories of this open letter against police violence Universitäter. This is a pun with the German words for university and perpetrator. So in English, it would be something like Universitrator or something. This press coverage was politically seconded and cheered on by the governing mayor of Berlin and all the way up to the federal government. The then Office of Education Minister Stark-Watzinger publicly declared she was appalled by the letter. The letter is solidarity with the protesters. And she asked whether the signatories would stand on the ground of the German constitution. And then the ministry drew up lists of the signatories, and without any legal basis or jurisdiction, they considered prosecuting them under criminal law and withdrawing their funding or future funding. A high-ranking staff member in the education ministry, who in the course of the scandal was even promoted to undersecretary, expressed his intentions clearly in internal chats. He said it's good to pressure the undesirable voices into censoring themselves. This process scheme, or this typical way of things to happen, was repeated again and again. Very instructive was the case of a protest camp at the Alice Salomon Hochschule, Alice Salomon University, also in Berlin, which in fact was quite a radical protest with really some transgressive slogans and banners like "Zios not welcome" for days hanging in the school, and "Glory to the resistance" and things like this. But nevertheless, the university followed a de-escalative approach. So they left room for the protest. They did not call the police to evict the protesters. They opened up rooms for ongoing debates while also directly interfering. So some banners had to be taken away. Some criminal complaints were filed. But basically, one could say they did everything regarding the circumstances as good as it is possible in the perspectives of an institution of research, knowledge, discourse, education, and care. Nevertheless, this found no positive resonance. There was again the same campaigning journalism, incitement, threats with financial cuts by the Berlin administrations for the whole university as a kind of punishment, massive police presence without being called by the university, and so on. So one could say university autonomy, that was something from yesterday. Okay, I said it's going to be a bit more structured now. That's really now. Authoritarian anti-Antisemitism. Okay, one word before, just a clarification. My critique of authoritarian anti-Antisemitism is not the claim that there is no anti-Semitism within the protest movements, for example, or within the current political conflict or in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. No, there is. And each escalation in the actual conflict also leads to a rise in Israel-related antisemitism. So we have seen graffiti on houses of Jews. We have seen smears against certain more pro-Israeli protests where someone wished them all to the death camps, and we have seen arson attacks against Jewish community hall and so on. Yeah, but so my critique does not say that there is no Israel-related antisemitism. It's a criticism of a certain way to address antisemitism. Basically, I would say a critique of antisemitism is still and must be a genuine part of all progressive, left-wing, democratic, humanist, whatever critique of society, even if it comes along with dilemmas of solidarity. But the authoritarian anti-Antisemitism instead is an hegemonic societal constellation in which accusations of antisemitism are used for other ends, namely to suppress criticism of Israel. It can be described by 4 characteristics or on 4 levels, as you see it here on the slide. So on the cognitive or semantic level, it is characterized by a focus in the whole discourse on antisemitism exclusively on Israel-related antisemitism, thereby not dealing with the bulk of anti-Semitic incidents that in fact take place anymore. And it is characterized especially by quite boldly equating all phenomena of distance towards Israel. I mean, the whole range of from criticism up to full-fledged anti-Zionism or real Israel-related antisemitism, everything together is anti-Semitic. And the new tendency, I already mentioned this, to explain the conflict itself through anti-Semitism. One example just comes to my mind when there was this protest. When there was a lecture by Francesca Albanese at the Free University. The Israeli ambassador to Germany asked the president of the Free University if it is a training camp for Hamas terrorists. Because an UN official was invited to speak there. Okay. So there's this new tendency to explain everything through the lens of the criticism or analysis of anti-Semitism, also everything regarding the Middle East or the Israel-Palestinian conflict itself. On the actor level, I've mixed up the order of appearance. On the actor level, I already spoke about this white coalitions. This white coalition, I said that there are distinct ideological sources, more genuine and clearly instrumental takes on anti-Semitism. But it's important to know how this spread, this discourse has spread, especially in established politics and media, of course, but also through all sectors of civil societies, and even enterprises and football clubs that subscribe to the respective framings, wordings, documents, statements, etc. What I find more important, and I would say some words about this now, is the level that I call the repertoires of action, or the regulatory strategies in this field, which can be summarized as especially juridification and securitization, for which I will give you now some examples from the previous 2 years after October the 7th. Well-known politicians, for example, have spoken out in favor of the Secret Service scrutinizing more and more areas of society. So they wanted universities, the cultural sector, etc., to be continuously background checked by security agencies regarding what they consider anti-Semitic. And we have had several incidents like this that have already been or that have already taken place. For example, that all Arab employees of the German broadcaster Deutsche Welle have been background checked according to their social media behavior. A Berlin Cultural Center, for example, had its funding withdrawn because it allowed an anti-Zionist Jewish association to use its space for an event. So they have been closed down. A Congress on Palestine that was supposed to take place in May last year was prevented with the help of all kinds of legal and illegal harassment, with the police even mobilizing public health departments, just to mention one of the many departments mobilized. And even the police issuing illegal bans on political activity against various invited speakers from abroad, which only some months later courts could rule as legally absolutely impossible. And this Congress is just a very harsh example of the many cancellations that we've seen. German administrations banned symbols of one side of the conflict, resulting, for example, in arrests and confiscations, for example, against someone, one of the members of the Jews for Justice for, I don't know, Jews for Justice for Palestinians, I think is the name, who was on the streets with a banner, Jew against genocide. The banner was taken by the police and she was arrested for this. We've seen tremendous police violence on various protests. We have seen absurdities of protest policing, like bans on languages. So it was forbidden today in Berlin, for example, to speak Arabic, Hebrew, or Irish, Gaelic on demonstrations. In short, one could say that liberal tendencies of protest policing that that have been characteristic for protest policing since the 1980s are being eroded with high speed. which is one of the most clear signs of this constellation's authoritarian leaning. This whole thing has found its programmatic formulation in a resolution by the German Bundestag, the German Parliament, under the heading "Never Again is Now," and a similar one focusing specifically on the education sector. And we see all the important aspects of that I exemplarily tried to outline now. So formulated there in quite clearly. So there's the aspect of externalization, especially migrants and Muslims are made out as the main causes of anti-Semitism. And this Bundestag's resolution seeks to make the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, which is highly questionable in both political and scholarly terms. They want to make it a general standard that should be applied in all areas of society. And some conservative politicians even suggested, this is not part of the resolution, but they even suggested to make it mandatory for science and research. So they want to make a definition mandatory for the very space where definitions and concepts are being discussed. This Bundestag resolution also reaffirms a substantively illegitimate and illegal BDS resolution passed by the Bundestag in 2019, and they strengthen it even more and want to. They call on the government for a ban on political activity of the full BDS movement. The resolution sees the central lever against anti-Semitism in modification of citizenship, asylum, and immigration laws. For example, there are some German states where you have to become naturalized, you have to tick a box in which you consent to Israel's right to exist, for example, or you cannot be naturalized in Germany if someone finds social media activity by yourself where you, for example, liked anything that starts with "from the river to the sea." There has been a similar education resolution. One of the main faults of this is that it rightly wants that there is more focus on Jewish history, anti-Semitism research, etc., but completely ignores that there's more to the whole area. So there's no demand to do more about the history of the conflict, history of and situation of the Middle East, etc. This is something that is just missing in this typically German lens, focusing on anti-Semitism only. One problem of these resolutions by the Bundestag is that they are highly binding in a normative sense. So we see many institutions drawing back on these resolutions and using these formulations, although there is no chance to legally review them, because resolutions by the parliament are just opinions issued by the parliament with a high binding normative power, but with no official judicial power, which is only only functions more subtly. Regarding the last point, I just quickly mentioned that there is a certain process scheme. I already talked about this. So there is an event that is disambiguated, scandalized. Of course, the scandalization is harshly rejected by those accused of anti-Semitism. In the end, there is no mediation, no complex discussion, but all those scandals end up with, I didn't translate this word, and they end up with a kind of cleansing ritual, which is either cancellation or step down or atonement or something of that kind. This is what I meant by Reinigungsritual, which is a German word which sneaked into this presentation. In short, the normative foundations of the Federal Republic of Germany, I mean, there are immutable principles of state and of the constitution, such as the freedom of speech, artistic expression and assembly, academic freedom, and the right of asylum that cannot be changed. that are being watered down in the very name of lessons from history. What is alarming about this constellation of authoritarian anti-Semitism is not so much that combating anti-Semitism of all things is at the center, although I think this is tragic. I mean, considering that German culture of remembrance has not been very effective in fighting anti-Semitism and in protecting Jews. Now, what I find most alarming is how extremely low the threshold is set in this context for what societal debates are expected to be able to handle before authorities resort to repressive measures. So they are trying to install parallel judicial systems in the universities. That's also part of this Bundestag's resolution and has been put into effect in some German states. If you have the wrong opinion or you did the wrong click, you cannot become German citizens. You can even be deported for your activity. So there has been a case where three European Union citizens and one American have received deportation orders. Although the administration responsible for this said, no, we cannot do this. This is not illegal. The Berlin government forced them to do this. Only courts again stopped this. So it's one clear example of how low the binding powers of the law are in this undeclared state of exception in Germany. Again, this treatment of the BDS movement is very symptomatic. While there is plenty to criticize about it, seeking to ban it on the basis of an equation with the Nazi boycott of Jewish businesses seems downright grotesque, I would say. This is a low point in the inability and unwillingness to grasp and endure complexity and ambiguity in this context. What we see is the German state's blatant partisanship in a national or nationalistic conflict in which the same slogans, like from the river to the sea, that can be found on both sides, also like the maps that show only your flag and not the flag of the other side, are only charged with ideological surplus meanings of anti-Semitism for one side and are massively sanctioned in the case of one side. So the responses range from denunciations and withdrawal of funding up to arrest. The consequences are people become intimidated and withdraw from public discourse. Others become loudly reactant. You can go fuck yourselves. The situation escalates. A culture of public debates disappears. Palestinians can find no public resonance for their grief and anger. And all this is buttressed by instruments of control and repression that are already menacing, but will be all the more vicious in the hands of a right-wing government that is quite imminent already in some German states. Once again, none of this is to say that there is no anti-Semitism in this conflict, including Israel-related anti-Semitism that needs to be combated. On the contrary, residential buildings have been tagged with Stars of David. There was an attempted arson attack on the Berlin synagogue. Journalists have been targeted with Jew press slurs, not to mention the genuine anti-Semitism of Hamas and their ilk. There can be no excuses or passivity in this respect. But in the current situation, we can no longer naively criticize anti-Semitism without also addressing the false accusations and instrumentalization of anti-Semitism. This is currently one of the key ideological battlegrounds on which an authoritarian restructuring of German society is being advanced. And simultaneously, it's not just being advanced, it is simultaneously camouflaged as a good cause. A left critical of anti-Semitism and in solidarity with Israel, as they call themselves, a left which therefore ignores this fact or overlooks what reactionary wagon it has hitched itself to, has betrayed its own universalist claim to liberation at least as much as have betrayed their own universalist claim, the Hamas apologists. And in view of the mass atrocities in Gaza, the increasing violence and repression and expulsion against the population in the West Bank, and the on and off wars of Israel in the region, this is certainly the bigger problem. Let me end with some more ideas what we might discuss about apart from authoritarian anti-Antisemitism, like, for example, the diversity of anti-Zionisms, and when, in fact, anti-Zionism can be anti-Semitic, the effects of this authoritarianism on Palestinians and the solidarity movement and the way the solidarity movement acts, which I find quite interesting. And have been recent interesting results also from research by my colleague Janis Grimm. Also find interesting the problem of nationalism in the second order Israel-Palestine conflict and the effects it has on conflict dynamics. Of course, I'm very, very much interested about in the discourse about these issues in Portugal and many, many more. And I hope we're going to have a good discussion about this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Peter. Maybe you can stop sharing the screen. We can see all the participants here again. So yeah, the sort of appreciation and recognition after a talk on Zoom is always a bit poor, but this would be the moment. So thank you so much. We do have now time for opening up for a discussion. And Guya, am I right that I take now the
Yeah, please. And I also would like to thank Peter for this amazing talk. And okay, you can manage the debate now. Thank you very much, Nina.
Okay, fantastic. So whoever would like to participate in the discussion, I would ask you first of all to open your video if anyhow possible. You can either use the chat or also the hands up sign that Zoom allows you to use. And maybe then you can briefly introduce yourself before you ask the question. Maybe just to give you a moment to prepare yourself, I'm happy also to start maybe with the first question. Peter, I mean, it has been, I think, really insightful and also getting sort of an entry point into, of course, a very complex and in many ways extremely difficult and complicated, ambiguous space. I'm still wondering, I mean, I expect that majorly we are also academics in this room, but might not be exclusively, and I don't want to exclude anyone with my question, but I'm still wondering, like, how do you experience the impact for academia working and operating under this context? So you had this specific example that you also mentioned in your talk that was about the student protest and also like the sort of solidarity among academics with student protests. But you also actually showed like your very own sort of, or the effect it has also had also on your own, because you were one of those also exposed there on the newspaper title page, which also was showing you under the slogan of university perpetrator, the German mix of that words. So I'd be curious, you don't need necessarily to go into your very own personal experience, but of course feel free to share about this as well, but how you observe this more widely. And this is just to give other people still a moment to then please also indicate if you have a question or comment.
Yeah, there is definitely a huge impact, I would say, on academia, and it is, of course, predominantly or maybe only, maybe aside from some side effects, a negative influence. But I think we have to have a kind of intersectional approach. If we only look at those people that found themselves in the Bild tabloid paper with their photographs, none of them was one of the organizers of this petition. They were taken for several reasons. Most of them because they were the typical enemies of the political right. So people who work in gender studies, in Middle East studies, who teach Arabic, people who work in the Center for Research on Anti-Semitism, which is often considered not strong enough in this discourse on authoritarianism, or not too openly pro-Israel or whatever. So I always suspected, and they do conferences on the comparison of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, which is eyed with suspicion by people who support this authoritarian tendency. So but you see that it has a different impact, for example, on a German white professor who once finds himself in the Bild tabloid, but who has a strong and secure position, which is quite different from the Palestinian doctoral student who had to be afraid of not being able to visit her family because she has to travel through Israel. And who filed a complaint against the Bild Zeitung, which was not successful in the end, and which left her with 10,000 euro costs for all this, for a lawyer, etc. So one has to differentiate this. But nevertheless, it has effects of fear and censorship. The colleague Janis Grimm I just mentioned, and several other colleagues at his research unit just made research about self-censorship amongst scholars concerned with Israel, Palestine, anti-Semitism, etc., and found out that they found out that there's a huge amount of self-censorship. People just don't write and say what they think they should or what they usually normally would. And this is especially it's very strong, especially amongst those who have limited contracts. So there's not so much self-censorship amongst full professors with permanent positions, which is a very tiny proportion of the academia in Germany. So yeah, and of course we can see when we look into the United States what all this can bring. I mean, with positions being cancelled overnight, with seminars being cancelled overnight, and so on. But the US case is only very strong compared to Germany. The general patterns are very similar. And you find this. I mean, I mentioned the case of Francesca Albanese, the UN ambassador for the Palestinian question that was twice cancelled in a German university. First time it was a political group, and this might have been somehow legit argument to say, well, it's too political an event, okay? But when she was invited, she himself being a distinguished jurist and expert, being invited by university professors to have a talk together with Eyal Weizmann, also an Israeli professor. And then this event is cancelled under the accusation of transporting Hamas ideology and being anti-Semitic. You know what everything about the freedom of research in Germany. Of course, there has never been freedom of research as such in the emphatic way, just because there are these words in the German constitution. But you see that there are direct attacks directly related to this area that have clearly visible effects. And I just looking at myself, I think this makes it quite well. It's let me just explain how it is. Whenever I write about these issues, I never just write down what I think is my analysis. I never write any sentence without thinking at the same time, how could this camp and this camp and this camp read what I write, and how could I maybe reformulate it in a bit that there is no ambiguity left, no point of putting the fingers in and pointing to weaknesses and so on. And when I did this talk, of course, all the time doing this talk, I was thinking about how would an imagined audience that I'm talking to react to this part or that part. Would they still listen to my next sentence when I said this the other one before? And I don't have this in other fields of my research. So maybe like that.
Yeah, thank you for this also very honest answer. So there is Raphael, and I saw also that Gaia posted something in the chat. Gaia, if you also want to briefly say a bit about it, please feel free to do that after Raphael.
Okay, so Peter, I want to start by thanking you for your presentation and for being the speaker of this session of the seminar on this very important topic. And I've had the pleasure of also reading the article you wrote in the ending of last year that Nina shared on the chat. And I have two questions after that. Both in your article and your presentation, you argued that authoritarian anti-Antisemitism narrows public debate and risks producing a repressive effect on democratic freedoms. And one could say this seems to mirror a broader authoritarian turn in European democracies, with further securitization and persecution of migrants and refugees, and now also restrictions on protests. So do you see this phenomenon as uniquely German, tied to Germany's history and historic policy regarding Israel, or instead as part of a wider European tendency and authoritarian drift? And also, how would you compare the German case with others with a different history, like the UK, where many peaceful pro-Palestine activists are also being repressed, and even social movement organizations like Palestine Action are being proscribed as terrorists? Thank you.
Yeah, shall I answer immediately or yeah? Well, I will do so. Yeah. Well, I think we have to see the German specificities and the general trends, and there are both. One thing that is, of course, very German is the significant or the way these issues are addressed and the political functions they have in Germany. But you can trace the development of this reason of state discourse that the security of Israel is part of the German reason of state, which is the basic formulation for all these developments I described. You can also see that the importance of anti-Semitism for parts of the German left, that they focus on this issue, that they find it important, that they deal with it a lot, elaborate on it a lot, quite different from the left in most of the countries of the world. Of course, has got to do a lot with the German history and the way to deal with this German history. And this again influences also official politics, because there's a huge overlap between political activism and educational activism, education institutions and political institutions in this field, where people can have careers starting in more pro-Israeli Antifa groups and ending up in official state positions and so on, or in conservative newspapers, everything we've seen a lot. But of course, there are several transnational dimensions. One is that the question of anti-Semitism is a transnational one. I mean, there is anti-Semitism even in countries where there are no Jews. There is also the instrumentalization of anti-Semitism in the international sphere by Israeli governments. There is this kind of strange but somehow natural alliance of Israel in its current right-wing orientation and the global political right, or many parts of the global political right, because they are somehow natural allies with their enemy images of Arabs, Muslims, etc. So they are in bed, and they all use, for partly different motivations, but they all use the accusation of anti-Semitism against their common enemies. So this is an international dimension, and of course, what you call the authoritarian drift is something that is working in many countries, that one could say is working globally, which is not essentially connected to the issue of anti-Semitism, but this issue is very often taken up, and is taken up with much enthusiasm, I would say, because it is a very good way for the political right to frame their own interests in a way that also resonates with parts of the liberal and left-wing political currents. So and last point, I already mentioned this in my talk. There is, I would say, from a normative point of view, there is also a problematic current within the solidarity movement that has at least, or that at least resonates with anti-Semitism, and sometimes is partly explicit anti-Semitism. Just to give you one example for this, it's an example from Germany, but you could have examples from all kinds of countries. Today in Berlin, there's going to be a demonstration that is explicitly taking place on this day. It uses much in its imagery, uses the imagery of October the 7th. So there are, like these flying vehicles Hamas used to cross the borders and things like this, and they celebrate really and explicitly in all kind of the acts of October the 7th as heroic and so on. So this we have these developments in parts of the solidarity movement. So there are several layers that are indeed transnational ones. I mean, there was in 2000 and something, there was this book on the so-called new anti-Semitism, and the subtitle was, and rightly so, a transnational debate. There's no encapsulated cultural memory in nationhood. There's no social movement repertoire of action that is solely confined to notional boundaries, etc., etc.
Thank you so much for your answer.
You're back, Nina.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, I had an issue with my Zoom. Now I'm on my mobile, but I think it should work. Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to ask Gaia if you wanted to say something also related to the reference you put in the chat.
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for organizing this beautiful seminar. Thanks, Ulrich. It's been very enlightening. I mean, the general issue, the special issue that we published a few months ago, the end of 2024, was about precisely what you were talking. So the hubris, the German hubris, facing the Holocaust, the memory of the Holocaust, and the mobilization of anti-Semitism in the public sphere, but also with a kind of discussion on Italy and what is going on in Italy as well, and which is very different, but somehow converging at the same time, because anti-Semitism is something that is absolutely constantly mobilized in the public sphere in Italy in order to demonize any sort of critique of Israel without going deeply into the roots of anti-Semitism. So the fact that is a kind of right extreme right government leading the country at the moment and trying to somehow get cleansed of any accusation of anti-Semitism is very important in the public sphere. Then, of course, the fact that it's not discussed how anti-Semitism is being structural to the Italian political culture for so many centuries. Centuries in terms of anti-Judaism and then decades about speaking about anti-Semitism is something very crucial and central in the management of this kind of debate in Italy at the moment. Then, of course, there is this mobilization, which is very clearly Islamophobic, since that the idea that that area is a complicated area because of the barbarity of, I'm talking about the Middle East, of the barbarity of Islamic/Arab people is absolutely crucial. Is something that I tried to trace back in Italian public discourses since Second World War. And at the same time, just talk about Albanese, which is something that happened last night in a debate with a Shoah survivor in the Italian television, who is against naming what is going on in Gaza as genocide. It was very instrumental in order, again, to somehow protect not Israel, but the Italian government's positioning facing the Israeli attack on Gaza, it used this survivor, Liliana Segre, in a conversation with Albanese in order to discuss the issue of genocide or not, which somehow allows us to go back to what Ulrich was saying, meaning how to use the memory of the Holocaust not as a terrain for a discussion about violence and genocidary violence against a particular kind of victimized historical subject, but to use the memory of the Holocaust as a more mobilizable object in order not to allow discussion, not to allow the political in discussion of a interest, political and economic interest in the area, and the reshaping of geopolitical balances in the area. So I'd like you to speak a little bit more about how the survivors are used, and memory of the Shoah are used in public debates or television debates against any sort of a living presence of what is not the memory of the past, but the memory of the present, genocide in Gaza. Thank you very much.
Gaia, do you want to say like one sentence about yourself?
Yeah, sorry. I'm a political philosopher, and I work, my work is particularly focused on racism and the relation between racism and the reproduction of race, racial capitalism, and the mobilization of racism in the public discourse in order to create the framework for authoritarianism. And so particularly how gender, race, but also class are mobilized in order to create a sort of a we, national or transnational we, that needs to be protected, and somehow getting upside down the relation between the perpetrator and the victim, and recreating the victimization of white, guilt-washed we in Europe especially, but also, of course, internationally.
Thank you. Peter.
I don't know how extensively I can elaborate on this. I mean, especially your very specific question on the mobilization of Holocaust survivors, because there are not many of them anymore. So the discourse is more about the instrumentalization of the Holocaust memory itself. And the thing that that is important for me, I think, is that that this is an area of constant conflict about dominant trends, I would say, of what the Holocaust is connected to, what it is used for, what it means, and also what it should be and must be connected to, what it must mean, what we have to derive from it, etc. So, for example, in the German discourse, for a long time, you could differentiate between two currents of lessons from the past. There was one never with the heading "Never Again War." It focused it focused the Nazi era regarding the war and resulted, for example, in peace movements and so on. It was kind of universalizing memory, but universalizing from a very specific perspective. There was another current that is very much related now to the pro-Israeli discussion, which was more like never again national socialism. So while the never again war camp more also called the era fascism, the others focused more on the specificities of the German fascism, that is national socialism. It's the significance of anti-Semitism within it, and so on. But there's a constant conflict over this, and what each current state of this debate is used to interpret all historical appearances. So, for example, whenever you invoke some comparison, even a very slight comparison to the Holocaust in Germany, there will be someone asking whether this is not just a move to trying to amend the past, or trying to relativize the German atrocities. But this discourse is also very narrow-minded. German does not know or does not take into account how the Holocaust, for example, or general National Socialism has become a symbol per se for the bad, for the for the worst things humans are able to. I once did a comparison of pictures from solidarity movements between Germany and the US. And one thing that we, for example, pointed out, that this idea that comparing, for example, Israeli atrocities to those of the Nazis, that it has very different meaning in Germany, for example, than in the US. It has a different meaning or different layers of meaning in the country where there are even personal, institutional, and all kinds of connections to the perpetrators, and in a country that has a dominant self-image as those who finished the Nazis, And if you do a comparison between something you criticize and the Nazis, it has a whole lot of different meanings. And I mean, in Germany, we've had these so-called Historikerstreits, so the wars of historians. One quite recently about the very issue. If it is legitimate I mean, this was kind of the starting point to draw lines from colonialism to the atrocities of the Nazis, and there are many connections, quite obvious connections, but it was not acceptable for this kind of discourse that kind of particularizes the German memory very much by focusing coming down to the only important thing that matters about National Socialism was anti-Semitism. And then if you see any other influence, or if someone points to any other influence without negating the immense role of the ideological anti-Semitism, but if you do some other draw some other lines, it is seen as something that that endangers what they perceive as the achievements of German memory culture, which, as I said before, are not so very big. Because if German memory culture, that is often seen as a role model, was so successful, why is there still so much anti-Semitism? Why are there right-wing parties on the verge of taking over power in some states and maybe even on the federal level, etc.? So I only want to point out from my perspective, there is no imminent, no essential meaning of the Holocaust. It depends on what kinds of its layers are mobilized, are used, and they always clash. And with all these, like all the other aspects that I talked about, I would be more happy if the different positions would be in a dialogue, because they are not all true or wrong or right or whatever. They rightly focus on different aspects, but there is no dialogue because it's always about so much that people seem incapable about critically discuss these issues.
Can I ask another question? Do we have time? Or maybe there is
we still do have time.
someone else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if there is anyone else.
I think I cannot hear you anymore, Nina.
Apologies.
Okay.
I was just saying I didn't see anyone.
I like to have a quick question, to make a quick question.
Then maybe go you first, Kuya, and then come back to you guys.
So yeah, so thank you very much. This was a really an amazing talk. It's very good to hear discussing these things that are so at the base of our daily discussions in these weeks and months. So my question is about the protest, so my impression, I'm not studying these things in this moment as a researcher, but more I'm participating and I'm also an observer. And in Italy, for instance, I think that we have in spite of the problems that Gaia was underlying of the public discourse and the political discourse of the government, etc. But there is a very varied coalition of protesters, and it seems to me that is involving many different actors, also institutional actors, more moderate actors, trade unions. So, for instance, we had a general strike on Friday. So there is a very huge coalition and very diverse and very transversal, which seems to me that is very interesting in terms of avoiding polarization of the discourse about Palestine, and I think it's a very interesting point, and I don't know why it is happening in Italy. For instance, we have many measures that are participating in the demonstration. Some of them, they are at the front line of the demonstration. For instance, in Genoa, when the flotilla was leaving at the beginning of September, I was there by chance, and I participated in a huge demonstration, and it was led by the mayor of Genova. And this is the case in other cities. And so there is, of course, I think that so I don't know if a comment, but also a question, because we always think about institutions, the state, government, etc., as kind of monolithic. But after there are many cleavages, at least in Italy, and also there are multi-level cleavages, like local governments, regional governments, different political forces, and different political entities and public entities. They have their own positions. So I think that the kind of this view of authoritarianism on the side of institutions and kind of mobilization and solidarity on the side of civil society, it can be also be more complex. I don't know if I explain myself, and I don't know if the case also in Germany you have some kind of political personality, institutions, local government, cities. Which is the role in all of this?
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite different in Germany. But when you first mentioned trade unions, I had to smile a bit because there was quite a big demonstration recently, which was the first one that had at least some major organizations behind it, which is namely the Left Party. But there are in no demonstration, no campaign, etc., you will find the major civil society associations aligned. Of course, there will always be trade unionists, there will always be local branches or whatever that take part, but the general cleavage that is typical for the German discourse leads to kind of immobility in huge sectors. So no trade unions, and even human rights organizations like Medico International or Amnesty International, etc. They have to struggle a lot to position themselves. They have to look that they don't lose donors who are more pro-Israel. They have to prepare themselves against media smears the way that I described it, that every pro-Palestinian event receives in the end.
Wow, impressive.
And they are all, as I said, all perceived through the lens of a misperceived perception of the more radical flank, and in the radical flank, which is not one camp. Also, there are different groups. I mean, there are people with a more nationalistic background, with a more religious background, traditional anti-imperialist left background, etc. But this spectra is so much antagonized, or has been antagonized by the German mainstream through the repression I mentioned, through the media discourse, etc., that they kind of developed a specific dynamic, which, in my interpretation, does not want to achieve anything anymore within the dominant society. They don't see any claim they can make. They don't see any success they can have. And one of the results you see that when in the last month you saw several politicians speaking out more critical towards Israel, etc. These movements did not say, wow, finally they've learned something or so. They complained about them having been silent for 2 years. This was the major discourse. So they are so fed up with they are so disattached from the mainstream discourse, from mainstream society. And one interpretation of this is not that the one interpretation that Janis Grimm gave is in his talk recently that the radical demonstrations are one of the few places where Palestinians have a space for their grief and anger without being policed. So the main function is not to achieve something politically, to achieve to force Germany to do something according international relations, etc. But they need the space to just express themselves, to have a space for their emotions. But this is of course a problem for the more moderate or bigger organizations, and then you end up with this one big demonstrations that finally took place, with the pro-Palestinian counter demonstrations against this pro-Palestinian demonstration. So this is the difficult situation we have now. But it's completely different from, for example, Great Britain, where unions decide whether they support BDS or not. And there are some who do and some who don't. It's absolutely unthinkable in Germany. So the whole field is so much policed, is so much, no one acts, or everyone acts very, very carefully to openly send. And those politicians who do side with Palestinians, they are subject to the same campaigns like the protests and the encampments, etc. Have been cases like the mayor of Jena and others. So, but these are you usually are not in a important political position in Germany with such positions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm really sorry I need to leave because I'm teaching soon. I need to eat something before starting my class. I'm really sorry that I have to leave before the end of the session, but Nina will deal with it very well. And thank you very much. And it was really nice also to meet you, even if virtually, Peter, because I heard about you, of course, from Britta in the past, and also I know your book with her, and it was very nice to meet you. And I hope to meet you here, maybe Lisbon one day, physically, not online.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And after we agree about the possibility of diffuse the section online or not, and we will talk about that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Nina and
Bye.
Rafael and
Bye.
all the audience. Ciao, ciao.
But we do still have a moment of time. So, and also Gaia still had another question. And I also would, we have a few participants left, but nevertheless, if there is any other question or comment, I would give a last chance to to indicate that. But Gaia, I give you the word. I would have a last comment question afterwards.
Yeah. Again, thanks a lot, because I'm learning a lot, and I'm trying myself to have a clear picture about not only what is going on in terms of how the political discourse or the political debate is shaped today in order to support a particular positioning and the restructuring of global order, but also in order for me, for us, to be straightforward, understandable, and less attackable when we are speaking about genocide in Gaza or speaking about what is settler colonialism today. So on the one hand, of course, the paradigm of anti-Semitism is absolutely productive, because in this special issue I was talking about, we used a lot in order to understand in which way this kind of refusal of coming to terms with all the contradictions, historical contradiction and actual contradictions related to anti-Semitism, and how anti-Semitism propagates together with other kind of supposedly opposed forms of hate, right? And prejudice. It is also true that in politically speaking and strategically speaking, I mean, the fact that it is impossible to speak about settler colonialism and the settler colonial hate or objectivation or monstrification of the object of settler colonialism is a very big deal. So what I've noticed in the demonstration Guia was talking about in Italy was something that I think somehow clever. So what was mentioned was Vietnam, right? What was mentioned was Algeria, so the Algerian war, the Algerian occupation by the French troops and French colons and so on and so forth. Many other kind of parallels, not so much with the Shoah, because otherwise it would leave space to something which is too complicated to deal with, in the public sphere and on the street when you are marching, right? But a straight reference to kind of unprotected victims who are massacred without any kind of international intervention, which is somehow obliterating or obfuscating the complexity. But in other ways, it's more strategic when we need to get straight to the point. Going back to Francesca Albanese, which is something that she tries to do all the time. So not being caught in comparisons, but trying to focus on legal frameworks and what is going on today. Of course, when we need to expand and somehow broaden up the view on anti-Semitism and anti-Antisemitism and how it is deployed. They are deployed in the public sphere, beyond Gaza, right? Let's go back to what you were saying. So the difficulties of having a clear debate about all the different positions, which are not only political, but they are very political and personal, and they need to come out. They need to come out from different experiences of what was the past and what is the present. This is absolutely an impossibility at the moment.
That was more of a comment, but please, Peter.
No, that's what I wanted to say.
So
Maybe one thing. I mean, one thing. The one message I always try to get through in the German discourse is that we should expect in all these conversations that there are different layers that should not be forced into the simple binary, which usually is on the one side you are very critical of anti-Semitism, very sensitive towards anti-Semitism, you are very sympathetic towards Israel, and you don't deal too much with racism. On the other hand, you are very pro-Palestinian, you are very critical of Israel. You don't deal with anti-Semitism, especially with anti-Semitism in part of the own camp, and this is so reductionist, and it's so problematic. If we look at the reports about the university protests, we find so many press reports about about a conflict between or a problematic constellation with Jewish students on one side and pro-Palestinian students on the other side. So one group is presented as an ethnic group. The other group is well painted as a I don't know, some kind of defect political camp or so on. That of course these Jewish groups also, there are different kinds of Jewish groups, that those Jewish groups that they actually talk about also have a political agenda and are not only Jewish groups, and so on. There are so many layers that are part of the conflict constellation that really does produce challenges for different kinds of students, and I find it very easy to imagine, for example, someone Jewish, let's say he's Jewish, for whatever else he might be, when he sees that maybe he or she puts on papers in remembrance of those that were captured on October the 7th, 2023. Then there is a protest camp of pro-Palestinian people who tear down this poster. But that can have so many meanings. It can be a disgrace. But if you look exactly the way who has put up this poster, someone who's known for his pro-Israel position, there are so many complexities, so many layers that in the end result in their confrontation and what's going on there. But we have no means and no fora to discuss these complexities. We always end up in the presentation of these binaries, and this is something I'm always trying to argue against.
Thank you. I just was wondering if we still can dedicate a few minutes also to your curiosity that you had towards Portugal, because now interestingly Italy came up, but Portugal not really. But I would prefer to do this a bit collectively. It's also not my field of study. I know of it, of course, as observer and participant in parts of activities that are happening here, but I do still hope that I can rely also on the other participants in the room to maybe quickly add a couple of thoughts about it. So I think it is actually still interesting also that Italy comes up strongly after Germany. And I think like one general observation that always has to be made in the context of Portugal and social movements in general here, that they are always like a little smaller and weaker in many areas. I think that's a major characteristic across all sort of issue areas, or how you want to call it. However, it is interesting that although we do have a center-right government here, and very much under pressure also here from the far right, a lot of different space has been possible to occupy and claim for pro-Palestinian solidarity movement and activities. And we have seen since the very, very beginning various forms of activism. I think, nevertheless, of course, like with different sort of moments and peaks, and I guess like at the moment, as we see it at various sites and locations, there's again like a bigger movement, or not, yeah, at least more mobilization happening, which has to do with the flotilla, and of course also the 4 Portuguese participants, so that it gets different media coverage, and also sort of speaks to this also weird construction of we do first need Portuguese citizens as part of such a mission to actually create sort of another form of attention, and then have a microphone to talk about the genocide. I think it's also still interesting when we look into the academic fields that, well, there were also student protests, I guess a year ago. I'm not entirely sure like when it started, but also in comparison to, I don't know, the Netherlands or many other places, it was also like rather smaller initiatives. However, also like the solidarity I could observe, and this is very subjective observation, was, I mean, that it existed among academics, but it was also not like such a very outspoken, loud resonance that it found within academia. There are occasional also like scientific associations, national associations that also have here or there made a statement. Just now, that's what I read this morning, that the Political Economy Association made a statement. Again, also in solidarity, also again with one member who happens to be also a political economy student, to make a statement. But overall, I also feel, although there might be actually more space to occupy for critical debate, it is not actually used enough. And that's also an interesting phenomena. But again, I think also like culturally speaking, and in the trajectories that we see in the Portuguese context, also not surprising per se. But that would be just a few sentences. I would be happy if anyone else who can say a bit more about the Portuguese case would like to add to this. And just jump in.
Raphael, I guess this was for you.
Well, Gaia also could say something about it, but
no, really have nothing to add. I think that the main paradigm that we have here regarding authoritarian anti-Antisemitism and voices against the pro-Palestine social movements is that the far right, which was typically traditionally seen as anti-Semitic in Portugal, is actually very pro-Israel. So that's really the main curiosity that I have regarding this phenomenon in Portugal, is that, which I think sets it apart from what you would expect to see in other places, which is a far right that is anti-Semitic and opposed to Israel. It's interesting to see how pro-Israeli sentiment as an excuse to repress the pro-Palestine social movements has also been co-opted by the far right and instrumentalized by it.
Yeah, maybe just one more observation. I mean, it's
yeah, sorry.
Just a very brief sentence. I mean, it's still interesting, just adding to what you said, Rafael, that, I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, the Portuguese state recognized Palestine as a state. Also, there was this incident, I don't remember exactly how long ago, that the Azores, the islands that belong to Portugal, were used actually to transport weapons to Israel, and that actually after there had been also a governmental decision not to allow that, and then there was a debate. So how could this be happening? And then they were trying to disguise it as that it was a procedural error. But yeah, so there are actually very skeptical discussions also around this publicly possible. Yeah, but sorry, Gaia, go on.
Yeah, historically speaking, I mean, Portugal as, I mean, all Iberian countries, but also Greece, Italy, the south of Europe, it's been profoundly anti-Semitic, but in many different ways. I mean, there is not just one anti-Semitism, and it is not spoken out in the same way. But the fact that Rafael, as Rafael was saying, there is this kind of a very interesting polarization, which is the same in Italy, exactly the same. So, I mean, we keep being anti-Semitic but we cannot tell, right? We cannot say. So, or we just leave the extreme fringes of our movements or extra-parliamentarian movements to speak about in an anti-Semitic way, to speak about what is going on in an anti-Semitic way, but we do not allow ourselves sitting in the parliament or sitting in the government's banks to speak that way. And then, of course, the anti or pro-Israel Islamophobia is very much about it. It is about the fact that in that way we have identified different enemy, which has to do also with all anti-migrant racism spreading all over Portugal at the moment, or having been in Italy for decades, right? So Islamophobia or anti-Islamic kind of racism is very crucial in this kind of articulation, public articulation of pro-Israel speech at the moment from the right and extreme right in Portugal. Then what is going on the streets and what has been reanimated by the flotilla is very crucial, because I mean, we have been going to all the demonstrations since the 8th of October, just to say that something very bad will have happened. And but talking about demonstration of a very small entity, 1,500, 500, 2,000 max. After the flotilla's mission started, of course, the idea of not being powerless, right? But having the capacity of saying something, not to leave everything in the hands of institutional politics, was something that triggered participation in the demonstrations, and is very various. So you have extreme left, liberals, center liberals, also the Catholic movement and social movements and so on and so forth. So it's very kind of spread and various. Same as in Italy. But of course, the numbers are much smaller. The last demonstration, which is a little bit bigger, is the one that occupied the train station, the Rossio train station, which was more kind of in the wake of what was happening already in Italy, because of course there was a kind of a particular attention to what was happening in Italy, what happened last weekend, talking about 2 million of people on the street, right? Saying enough, right? So here again, the slogans, the flyers are mostly focused on the stop genocide, and anti-Semitism in terms of speeches, in terms of graffitis, is not so apparent in Portugal, if compared to other places, of course. But at the same time, I need to stress the fact that the extreme right movements or far right movements here in Portugal are more focused on the Islamic presence or brown and black presence, which is the very kind of object of concern and propaganda, which has a consequence, is not somehow shifts the attention from the original enemy, the internal enemy.
Thank you for jumping in, Rafael and Gaia. So we have, I think, now the moment to slowly come to an end. Nevertheless, I wanted to ask Peter if you still have any specific question we should get to. If that's not the case, I really would like to thank you again for this very insightful session. And I also would like to thank the engaged audience that made it until now. And I think it's for sure also an occasion to actually for various participants to continue engaging with your work and to follow what you are doing, Peter. So thank you very much for that. And next time we have to make sure that you can come in person and that we can continue the discussion.
I would very much appreciate that.
we will work on this. So thank you again.
As we see, where you are seems to be much nicer than where I am.
Yes, absolutely. Temperature-wise, and also for various other reasons. Okay, so then thank you so much. And well, the social movement and political participation seminar series continues with its own stream, and the live group continues with its own stream, but it has all public seminars. So always feel free to follow what's happening here and join. Thank you. And thank you again, Rafael.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.